It's time. Time to make the Warhammer from Troll Hunters. This is definitely my most requested prop. Partially because it took me so long to get to it. It's not that I was purposefully stalling, but if I was gonna do this, I wanted to do it right. I wanted to make it glow. The problem is, my circuitry skills are basically non-existent. And I was kind of procrastinating until I felt like learning a new skill. But then I came up with a stupidly simple solution, and now have no excuse for waiting. What is this magical revelation, you may be wondering? Well, you're gonna have to wait. But don't worry. All will be revealed by the end of the video. First, the handle. I'm of course going to make this as close as possible, but I may have to fudge a little bit just in terms of the exact dimensions of things, simply because my plan involves these threaded PVC pipe ends, and there were only so many sizes to choose from, and when I chose the size that I thought would work the best, that meant there were only so many other sizes of pipe that would fit inside of it. I'm gonna need to telescope a bunch of these pieces, which is why I have them cut out and kinda shaved down into place. There's actually one of these that I forgot to shave an end off of, and I have not yet decided if I want to finish that piece, because I don't really want to use power tools right now. I was able to get that much done just using a Dynafile in only my right hand, because my left hand is still hurt. This pipe was the one that required the most sanding, because I didn't want it to just look like a PVC pipe. I wanted it to have a little bit of a taper and a contour to it. I didn't shave off enough to make that obvious, because I didn't want to go all the way through the pipe, but it does now have a slightly more organic look, which I prefer to just the regular PVC. But yeah, I had it in a vise, kept my bad hand at my side, and was just running down it with the Dynafile, so it was fairly low maintenance, but I couldn't stop myself sometimes from using two hands, and then the vibration would have me concerned a little bit. But you know what? It's just a little piece here that needs smoothed out, so I think I'll go ahead and grab the Dremel and do that real quick, and then I'll get to actually assembling the handle. And I'm using some super glue and hot glue to keep everything fixed. I know those don't necessarily bond that well with PVC, but most of it is just friction fit. I just want something to kind of hold it in there. I'm actually gonna keep this piece separate because I'm planning on building up like the foam shapes on either of these ends. It'll be easier to do that if it's a separate piece. So as for the explanation of things, I forgot where I was. But as for the making of things, this is where I am. I got the pommel all shaped up, and as you can see, I had to put on several layers of different types of foam and foam clay to try and smooth everything over. And when finishing up foam, specifically the clay, the clay is a lot easier to sand, but it still gets roughed up by the sanding sometimes. And so what I've started doing is I've started using some of this sanding sealer. It's meant for wood. How it appears to work is that it'll like actually soak into the wood grain so that when you're sanding it, you're not just sanding off the top. Like if you sand down into the wood, you can still get a smooth surface because that stuff is soaked in. I realized it should basically do the same thing for foam, so I've been using it and that seems to be working. But I still put a few coats of Mod Podge on it, mostly to fill in some of the cracks between the layers, and that still needs sanded down. And in all of the reference images that I can find, the pommel actually looks kind of squared off, but I'm gonna leave it round because I'm planning on having this screwing onto the hammerhead, or it'll attach to this section and then this section will screw on there. I won't really be able to control where a squared edge will align, so I'm gonna leave it round, and that way it doesn't matter, it'll stay round wherever it lands. The etch marks are a little hard to see, but I drew them out as best as I could, just getting the basic idea of what's there, and then used a cutoff wheel on the Dremel to just shave off a little bit on there. So for the handle, basically all I need to do is finish sanding all the places where I covered it in Mod Podge, stick the two pieces together, and then prime it. But while that is going on, I'm going to start working on the hammer head. I'm going to build it around the other end of the coupling, and I'm going to use some of this packing foam stuff because it should be a little bit that's not quite as translucent as I thought it was going to be. I think it'll be okay, because I can like shave out some of the inside. I can make it thinner, and that'll be easier for light to shine through. And I'm going to be covering it in resin, so if I do make it thinner, the resin should keep everything solid enough that I don't have to worry about it like breaking. I'm also hoping that resin will keep the whole thing together, because I'm not sure what glue to use on this. Don't chew on that, stop it. I know contact cement will melt styrofoam. I don't know if that'll happen here, but I'm just assuming that it will, and I'm not even gonna try. I think my best bet is actually to just use hot glue on the low setting. Use that to just kind of stick the pieces together, and then, like I said, cover it in resin, and hopefully that will be what really holds everything in place, because it's resin. It's pretty solid. There's not really a whole lot I can do to pattern this ahead of time. I just want to make sure that I have like the general size and shape dialed in. In the show, there's normally this like dragon face inside of it with these 3 horns poking out. Since I want the inside to be hollow, I'm gonna forget about that and just focus on the hammer. The way the pictures are, it's hard to get a good lock on just how many spikes there are, let alone how exactly they're positioned. But the important thing is that it's spiky. And I think that's sufficiently spiky. It gets the right kind of silhouette down, and it looks pretty good once I get... Why is that so sticky all of a sudden? I do feel like maybe the handle is a little bit long. If it really gets to me, I might cut off a section. I mean, I already did that. I cut off just like an inch. That's why I have tape here, because I sanded it down, so now it's a little loose inside the socket that it's supposed to fit into. But I mean, it is like, it's a hefty thing. I did realize a place where I might have went wrong, because when I was guesstimating the size, I was looking at Toby's hands and like kind of how many hands it looked like he could grip the sections with. That like he can hold the upper section kind of like that, and then it looked like he could fit both hands easily on the lower section. So I just kind of took that and then just cut it whatever looked right. But Toby is a rather squat fellow, and the way he's animated, his hands are very small. I mean, I'm the main one that's going to be wielding this, so it makes sense to have it be proportioned to me. Plus, I mean, this is already like a ridiculously sized hammerhead, so if I make the handle so long that like it kind of balances it out, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it is still something to take into consideration. So can that screw in correctly if I don't get it crooked? About had a snafu there, but we're okay. I did notice that I might want to reinforce around here a little more just to make sure it doesn't fall off. And then it's just a waiting game, because each time I cover it in resin, the resin will need to dry for a day. As a testament to my dazzling logic skills, I realized that I ran the risk of dripping resin into the threads of the coupling. So I decided to go ahead and screw the two pieces together, because that'll protect the threads. Well, I still dripped resin onto it, and the two pieces fused together.
Why would it be glued on, you dingus?
Dazzling display of logic.
I pulled and twisted my little heart out trying to get those two pieces apart. I didn't want to twist too hard, because every now and then I'd twist and I'd be like, oh, I think I hear resin cracking. Oh, wait. Yeah. Eventually, I decided to stop twisting and try a different approach. So I looked around, I found where I thought the most resin had dripped, and I just started trying to whittle it away with a knife. And then I dripped some rubbing alcohol into the crack of the screws. Rubbing alcohol might just work on resin when it's uncured, like to clean up the sticky. I don't know if it did that much, because like I dripped it in and let it sit for a little bit, and then I tried twisting it. And it did loosen it up, because in one good twist, I ripped the whole damn thing off. Well, at least some of this is securely glued on. I guess that gives me hope that I will be able to reattach it. But for now, I guess I'm just gonna go ahead and finish working on the hammer, or the hammer head. Because that way I won't have to worry about getting any resin on the threads if the threads are basically non-existent at this point. That will give me some time to figure out how to reattach it. Well, first I have to detach it, because I need it to screw in there, because that was my whole plan. So I guess at some point I'm probably going to take this out to the shop and stick it in the vise and really try to give it all I've got. Well, I might need help because I still don't want to stress my hand out. It's just recently cleared by the doctor, so it's still a little tender. So to properly secure the coupling back into the hammer, I cut a bunch of chunks out of some PVC, heated them up, and then shaped them into little L's. I glued all those onto the female end and then stuck that into the hammer. I had to sand out the hole a little bit more to make room for the extra material, but I didn't sand out too much because I still wanted it to be a pretty snug fit. Then I just slathered everything in hot glue, just the whole area, hot glue in every crack, every crevice, to hopefully spread it out as much as possible and really give it a grip. Also, before I did that, I poured some resin into the bottom of the hammer so that when the hot glue was dry all over the top, I could then flip it over and hopefully let the resin drip down and solidify around the other side of the coupling too. I have no way of really looking up around the coupling to see if it settled in the place I wanted it to be. I just assume that it did. As for the rest of the hammer, it really just took a lot of resin and a lot of sanding. There was a point when I thought I was done and I was ready to move on to the next step, but then once I started sanding, I realized just how much of a texture there was, because when I put the resin on one side, it will usually drip down the other sides, and then since I kept turning it in order to put the resin on all the different sides, there ended up with this like very obvious like crisscross drip pattern, and I didn't really like that, and I didn't think I'd be able, I thought if I sanded all that down, then that would sand too much, and I'd sand it down all the way to the foam. So I had to give it another round of resin. If I was really going to do this, if I was putting a lot more effort into making it flawless, I would probably just start with all the resin, just so much resin, or I just find a different material to work with, because this is what I had on hand, but it's possible that you could just get a better foam that you wouldn't have to soak it in resin in order to make it look crystalline. Because even then when I did do that, I put on some more layers of resin and then I sanded it down. I still sanded through the resin in a couple places, but since I was getting tired and I didn't want to spend another week just waiting for resin to dry, I went ahead and just covered up those thin places with some Mod Podge to try and even it out and just give it a little strength. And for now, I'm just leaving it because the hammer does have some variations. There are some highlights, there are some dark spots. Speaking of which, as I was putting on more of those layers of resin, I did put on some like darker paint layers. I made some of the spikes look a little darker and a little redder. I put some black smudges here and there just to try and eke out that sort of fiery look. And so, since most of the places where I sanded through are kind of like on the edges and the corners, I'm hoping that if I leave them it'll just look like white edges of crystal or where it's kind of like powdering up a little bit. I might still tinker on it if I feel like it, but for now, I'm not going to do anything with it because this is already taking a lot longer than I had anticipated. I want this to be done, I want to get the video out there, and I want those views. I didn't say anything. Like and subscribe though. As for the handle, I went through a somewhat complicated painting process because it's not just a plain silver. It's kind of got like a dappled, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's uneven, got some different tones going. So I thought maybe if I put on a bunch of different colors of paint, like I started with black primer, then I put on like some gray, then some red and some yellow, covered that in silver, covered that in gold, and then my plan was to cover that in, I have this like dark chrome model spray paint, and then I was planning on sanding all those layers down and seeing if it like kind of evened out and showed some of the inner colors. I forgot just how thin that dark gray paint was. So when I sprayed that onto the gold, it looked pretty speckled already, and I realized I could have just stuck with that. But for the sake of sticking to the plan and not feeling like I'd wasted time, I went ahead and sanded it down. And I do think that helped kind of bring back the look of like kind of roughed up metal, because like I work with metal all day long. It's not just a plain gray, it's got streaks, it's got smudges. It's normally really hard to do that with paint, but I actually think this like sanding it down method kind of worked. I'm just noticing that it's got a little some wear and tear on it already from where I've been like leaning it on things and like putting masking tape on it and stuff. So I guess, I mean, it makes it look like it's damaged metal because it's an old artifact. So I guess that's not a big deal. But yeah, I was noticing like some scuffs and things. But yeah, once I got the metallic color the way I wanted it, then I glued the two pieces together and I painted all of these etch marks red. And I did that while I was still in the middle of putting resin on the hammerhead. So I went ahead and poured some of the excess resin down in there. I had already done that. I'd filled up the handle to like about here. And so then I'm hoping that I filled it up enough that made it extra secure, because I wasn't sure how much like the hot glue would really hold on to. I mean, it's friction fit in there really hard anyway, and then the hot glue is just kind of to fill up the gap. So I think it should be solid even without the resin. But then assuming if the resin filled up enough to grip both pieces, then that should be in there pretty dang permanently. And with the hammerhead, there's some of the places where I had sanded through. So like I said, I just put some Mod Podge on there, and then I sprayed the whole thing with some gloss clear coat sealer, mostly just to take away the scuffed, sanded look. Because, you know, like when you sand things, it's like it makes it a lot more opaque and white and powdery. So spraying it with some clear sealer kind of takes that away. I think I might still just like scuff it up a little bit as I go. Just to make it look less plasticky, mostly. But, you know, I mean, because it should be shiny, it should be glossy, because it's supposed to be crystal, but, you know, crystal gets damaged and scratched and things like that, so it could still be dialed in a little bit. That's the gist of it, and most of those types of details won't show up on the camera anyway. Since I'm talking about it, though, I'm gonna just kind of go over some of the edges and the highlights. Just give it a little bit of weathering. So now that I've gotten pretty much everything done. You're probably wondering, what, oh Emmett, is your master plan for making it light up? Well, I shall tell you. I'm gonna stick a bunch of lights in it. But yeah, and this is one reason why I chose the size of pipe that I did, because I knew I was going to be working with this battery pack and it fits in almost perfectly. So I'm happy with that. Oh, this is getting heavy. Can you see that? Huh. That's really not as bright as I would have liked to hope. Here, I have an idea.
Maybe we could turn off these lights. You could cup your hands around your eyes and look real close.
Sight. Oh! Hero! And a handsome one at that.
I feel like telling ghost stories! Okay, that's more impressive. Yeah, it needs a dark room. Except the problem is though, like, in a dark room, I'm gonna talk loud because I didn't bring in my actual microphone. So there's a lot of interference right now. But like in a dark room, you can't see all the details of like the painting and stuff that I put into it, but then it glows. But then like out in the light, you can see the detail, but you can't see it glow. I guess that's kind of what I was going for. I was wanting to put enough work into it so that it would look cool whether it glowed or not, and then that way, this way, like if it's in the dark, then it glows, and that's all you need. And then if it's in the light, you have my beautiful craftsmanship to look at instead of the light works. If you've noticed the color shift, I turned off all my studio lights and put the camera on automatic so that hopefully maybe you can see the glowing a little more. But yeah, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all the support and the views and the comments over the years. A lot of people wanted this. Here you go. Between the resin and the handle and the lights in the head, this is pretty hefty. But yeah, I do appreciate all the requests, even though like I may or may not actually get around to responding or to making the items that you'd like me to make. I'm still grateful. But yeah, I said it before, I'll say it again. Thank you for watching, and have an awesome sauce day.